Hello, welcome back again. And now, from Boston, Massachusetts, Head of Bain and Company's Global Innovation and Agile Practices, Darrell Rigby is here. I guess it is still morning in your time zone, so good morning, Darrell. We are grateful to see you here with us, and we are ready to hear about your new book and your speech. And stage is yours.
I guess there's a small technical issue again. We are trying to fix it.
Can you hear me and see my slides?
Yeah,
Yes,
you can continue.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I must say, I'm looking at this agenda and the participants. What an honor to be part of such an impressive group. And the second thing I would say is if you only take one thing away from this discussion today, I hope it might be this. If you and your team are not having fun with Agile, you're not doing it right. Because the truth is, Agile is designed for the way humans work most happily and most successfully. I think we sometimes have a tendency to overcomplicate it and make it sound like it's some complex, extravagant way of getting things done. It's just the way humans like to work. And so I really do find that when I'm working with organizations, I've been doing this for 15 years now, that most of the people after just a couple of weeks or months are saying, I'd never go back to the old way of working. And that's my primary message. This should be fun. Over the last 6 months, I have met with the senior executives of more than 100 major companies. And I hear a very common message, which is we seem to be operating in an environment of constant crises and what used to be called black swan events, but are sort of common occurrences these days. And the question is always the same. You know, today we're dealing with a pandemic disease. We don't know when it's going to end. There will probably be others. But even when it is over, there are natural disasters and digital disruptions and data breaches and terrorist events and financial shocks and social unrest and trade wars. It just seems to be one crisis after another. So, how do we build a business that will be capable of thriving in this kind of unpredictable and accelerating change? Many are telling me that they feel like they've made progress actually over the last 7, 8 months. But they know they're not doing it right because the innovation is still sporadic rather than systematic. A lot of the people, a lot of the employees are telling the executives we're burned out, we're exhausted. And so they're saying, how do we bottle up the good parts of this and yet do it in more agile ways so that it becomes sustainable and systematic so that when this pandemic passes, we don't just spring back to our old ways of working. And my experience tells me that if you want to do that, if you want to build an organization that can thrive in this kind of an environment, you have to do three things. First, you have to run the business. Let's call that operations. You have to do that efficiently. This is the thing that Lean and Lean Six Sigma has done so well. We reduce the variability. We standardize operations. We develop stable and predictable processes. And this has an important role. You know, in normal times, I do a lot of flying. When I get onto an airplane, I do not want to hear the pilot say, fasten your seatbelts, because we are going to try an agile takeoff. We haven't checked the fuel. We haven't done all the mechanical checks. We're not going to listen to these bureaucratic air traffic controllers. We're just going to go straight to the front of the line, take off like a rocket. And if it doesn't work, well, test and learn. Maybe the next flight will do it better. Thanks, but no thanks. There is a role for efficiency and consistency and operating procedures in running the business. And it's an important part of doing business. At the same time, we have to change the business. Let's call that innovation. And we have to change the business at least as quickly as our customers, as our competitors, as technologies are changing. And when we do that, we are introducing variability. And that variability, of course, will have some good aspects and some bad aspects. The trick of Agile is, let's stop the things that aren't working as quickly as possible, and let's take the things that are working and amplify them to go faster than people ever imagined. The third thing that has to happen is run the business efficiently, change the business effectively, and harmonize these operations so that they work together effectively, because both have to be healthy and harmonized. The problem is, over hundreds of years, that bureaucracies tend to overextend their strengths and create dangerously unbalanced systems. A lot of the traditional ways of managing are pretty good in the business, but they are not good at innovation. They're not good at changing the business. The cultures become boss-centric rather than customer-centric, and innovations are managed like predict and command and control assembly lines. We know how this works. This is the waterfall approach. You predict very specific requirements, and then you just design and develop and verify and test, and you meet those requirements. There's only one problem with this approach, and that is 70 to 90% of business innovations fail. Think about that for a moment. 70 to 90% fail. And the reason they fail is not that they fail to develop things that meet specifications. It's because the specifications are wrong. It's because we can't predict. Of those that succeed, 2/3 pivot significantly from their original plans. So, second thing I'd ask you to remember from this presentation, you either plan to adapt or you plan to fail. And we've got so much data proving this. On the far left side of this slide, this is a professor who looked at the fastest growing startups in the US and went back and looked at their original plans, compared them to what made them successful today. 2/3 changed. I've talked to a lot of venture capitalists. This happens to be from a friend named Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures, who went back, looked at his deals, and said of those that succeeded, 2/3 had to adapt their plan to get to success. And in my own life, I found the same thing. Just some examples. Well, I should start off by warning you, I'm very old. When I grew up, we did not have computers, we did not have video games, we did not have tablets. We had toys like a Slinky. The interesting thing about a Slinky is it was never invented as a toy. It turned into one of the first toys that went into the Toy Hall of Fame, but it didn't start out as a toy. It started off by an engineer who was trying to figure out how to stabilize sensitive instruments in turbulent seas. But it fell onto a stack of books, onto a desk, onto a chair, onto the floor, and it stood upright, and he said, that's cool. And he took it home and tested it with neighborhood kids who loved it, and it turned into a toy. Slack. Many of you think Slack, very useful in technology, was probably launched as that company. It wasn't. It was a video game company that went bankrupt. And in the bankruptcy, the venture capitalists and the managers got together and said, is there anything worth saving? Well, yeah, there's this tool that the geeks use in the back of the room. All right, let's take a look at it. They liked it. They relaunched the company. It became the fastest growing unicorn of all time by adapting. Some of you have probably seen Disney's movie Frozen. I will tell you, I'm a grandfather, 8 grandchildren. For several years, I watched this movie at least once a day, every day of the week, mostly with my granddaughters. I got so interested in it that I went back and studied how it came about. And the interesting thing is that originally, in the original movie, Elsa and Anna were enemies. And Elsa was ugly. She had a big, long nose. Her skin was blue. Her hair was spiky. And in the middle of making the movie, a husband and wife songwriting team came back and said, "Excuse us, just listen to this. We think this premise is wrong. We don't think Elsa is evil. We think she's misunderstood. Just listen to this song." And they played a song called Let It Go. And when the directors heard the song, they said, "You're right. No wonder this movie has been struggling." In fact, Disney had been trying to make this movie since the 1930s unsuccessfully. They redid it. They made Elsa beautiful. They made Elsa and Anna beloved sisters. They made Elsa independent, strong. And as a result, the movie was an enormous success, pivoting. I'm sure most of you have used YouTube. Several years ago, I met a founder of YouTube at the World Economic Forum in Davos and asked him, "How did you get started?" And he said, "Well, it was interesting. I don't know how many of you know this, but YouTube started off as an online video dating service. And after 1 week, there were 0 online video dating videos submitted. And so they decided to open it up. You want to show us kids? You want to show us cats? We don't care. We've got the capacity." And it pivoted and it became an enormous success. So, one more time, 2/3 of our predictions are wrong. Plan to adapt or plan to fail. And that's all the Agile is intended to do, actually. It's simple. It's not complicated. All we're really trying to do is move from traditional approaches where we predict and we command and we control and we have infrequent big bang releases to things where we're going to do rapid learning and adaptation. We're going to break big tasks into small modules. We're going to test. We're going to learn. We're going to have frequent releases, much faster time to value. We're going to empower people. This is not complicated. This is a natural way of working, particularly in turbulent environments. The problem is, and my greatest fear is, that too many people are doing Agile wrong, which is going to send a scrap heap of management fads if we're not careful, right alongside re-engineering and quality circles. And what I'm seeing in the marketplace is, along with rapid growth, is a lot of rapid corruption of these simple insights about Agile, setting naive expectations about what it's supposed to do. Big bang transformations, which I know can have their places, but I will tell you that too many times, big bang transformations have a striking resemblance to waterfall predict command and control processes. Sometimes they're right, sometimes it's necessary, but much of the time it is a bureaucratic waterfall approach to transformations. We see leaders delegating Agile rather than practicing it themselves, changing structures rather than changing the ways of working, bungling business definitions and replacing traditional silos with new Agile silos, which are every bit as steely as the other silos that they replaced. We see Agile being used as a euphemism for layoffs, where it begins with 30 or 40% of the people being laid off. We see inept, inconsistent Agile practices, 20 different ways of doing it around the organization, makes training and coaching and moving from team to team complicated. We see Agile teams trapped in bureaucratic operating models. The teams themselves are working well, but they can't speak as quickly as they should be because they're trapped inside bureaucratic operating models. And we see people thinking from the inside out instead of the customer back. Let's just focus on designing all of these processes. Let's restructure the organization, as opposed to saying, wait a second, what are we trying to do strategically? What are we trying to do for our customers? And finally, failing to harmonize and inspire both innovators and operators. We get 2 classes of citizens. the cool kids, the agile teams, and the operators who aren't sure that what they're doing matters anymore. And that's crazy because these are the front lines. These are the people that are closest to how things work. If you asked me which of these things are most damaging, that's easy to answer because the State of Agile report looks at this on a regular basis, tens of thousands of Agile teams over the years. And almost always floating to the top are these things. Number one, inconsistent agile approaches, lack of skills, inconsistent processes and practices across teams, doing agile in sloppy ways so that nobody really knows how it works. And often when we go in and say, boy, this team isn't working, what's wrong? Well, we find that it's not using those agile principles and practices that we described earlier. And the second and even more frequent problem is organizational resistance to change, not enough leadership participation, the culture's at odds with agile values. We're not getting the support from management that we need. And that's the challenge. I've been working with over the last 3 months and talking to 3 of the companies that I'm sure all of you, I'll keep them confidential, but I'm sure all of you would say, these are the most innovative and agile organizations in the world. All of them have more than 2,000, 3,000 agile teams. And yet, what they're telling me is we know how to do agile teams extraordinarily well. We can launch hundreds of agile teams anytime we want to. But we're still learning to make the business system more agile. And in order to do that, we can't have agile teams trapped in bureaucratic organizations. We have to create an agile architecture around them. And we have to create an agile operating model to make that architecture work. This is the reason that I say no roles change more than the roles of leaders in an agile transformation. Because what we have to do is to help leaders, folks like you, spend much less time micromanaging and a lot more time leading. A lot of leaders have a tendency to believe, well, because I can do almost everything than most people in the organization, then I should. But that's wrong. One of the things David Ricardo taught us, the difference between Adam Smith's competitive advantage and David Ricardo's comparative advantage is when you find something that only you can do, you have to do as much of that as possible. Every hour of micromanaging is an hour less of leading. We have to delegate. It puts it in the hands of the right people, and it builds a future generation of skilled leaders, skilled managers. And it turns out that there's a very strong connection between happiness and innovation, that people who are happier are more innovative, and that people that are more innovative are happier. We need to do this for our own happiness as well as the happiness of those around us. And when we do that, it frees up time for us to spend more time leading. Our greatest innovation will be building an agile operating system, the most important of all innovations. How can we build an agile operating system that will actually make these teams work? Strengthen the corporate vision, help to sequence the corporate backlog, simplify and focus work, help people to understand the context, the leader's intent of why they're doing what they're doing. And when they do that, the executive committee becomes an agile leadership team. And they're creating the most full of all innovations, an agile system. And each member of the leadership team has an important role, just like any member of any agile team, to bring their expertise so that the CEO, for example, turns into the initiative owner or the product owner. And the CHRO is designing the human resources system. And the CFO is changing the planning and the budgeting processes to be more agile so that these teams work. And as a team of collective experts, we work to build an Agile system. And as we do that, we transition to an Agile enterprise and achieve very bold ambitions, but through step-by-step progress. Yes, we'll start by building beacons of inspiration in Agile teams. And as quickly as possible, we'll move to Agile at scale. And Agile at scale means two things, by the way. It means that we can do Agile any place we need innovation. That may be technology, that may be business processes, that may be new products and services. Anywhere we want to do it, we can do it. And it also means we can do large scale teams of teams. This is what Saab Aeronautics is doing in building the Gripen fighter jet, the most cost-effective fighter jet in the world. 100 teams working together, but we can tackle big programs with Agile. And we will be an Agile enterprise. The kind of company I was talking about earlier that runs efficiently, changes effectively, and harmonizes the operations and the innovations. In that process, more people will likely be doing Agile innovation, working on Agile teams. But in my personal experience, that's never 100% of the organization. There are a lot of people that are going to be working in operations. And yes, the number of people involved in Agile teams may be 10%, 20%, and we may have everybody doing some innovation, doing some Agile work, but 80% of their time is going to be spent on routine operations. So I'm going to show you a picture of a company that I've been working with and what an Agile enterprise actually looks like, because sometimes this is surprising to people. The first thing that you'll notice is at the top, the organization chart is actually fairly traditional. In fact, the truth is, I can make Agile work in any organization chart you can show me. And we've done this 350 times over the last 2 years. So I know from empirical data that this is possible. These red circles are Agile, persistent Agile teams. And notice how widespread they are. And notice that they're not pulled out of the organization and pulled into some separate organization of squad tribes and chapters and guilds. They're located as close as possible to the operations that will adopt and scale them. They'll be everywhere. There are also gray circles, temporary teams that come together to solve urgent problems, sometimes improving business processes. You'll notice a number of people working in those gray boxes, standard operations. And you'll notice people in red boxes. Think of those as people inside the organization, but people who are working like help desks to make sure that the flow of Agile teams is never slowed down. That if they need something from legal or from HR or from finance, these are the help desks that make sure they don't have to wait more than 24 hours to get a response. So just notice that this can work in any organization, because what we're doing is pulling together these cross-functional teams from anywhere in the organization, and we're locating them as closely as possible to the operations that will make them work. And as we do this, two things change in the organization. Number one, Agile principles or values or mindsets or whatever you want to call them permeate the entire organization because it's working together. Everybody is obsessed with the customer. Sometimes they're internal customers, that's fine. But everybody in the organization can say, I have a customer. I know who my customer is. I know what they want, and my job, I'm happy. Everybody feels like they have the opportunity to utilize their strengths. Everybody has the opportunity to learn and grow. Everybody has the responsibility to eliminate headaches and impediments in their jobs to make it more fulfilling. And in these Agile teams that are really working every day like an Agile team, they will adopt and make Agile practices habitual. it will feel natural. The things that we talk about, stand-ups and planning processes and sprints, this just becomes a better way of working, a happier way of working. And as we do that, we will change the operating model. We're looking for balance, not an organization that is too static, not an organization that is too chaotic, but an organization that is agile. And we will adapt our operating model over time. It will affect our strategy, our leadership, and our culture, our planning, budgeting, reviewing processes, our structure, our talent engine, our business processes, our technology and data. In my opinion, one of the dumbest concepts in business is the annual cycle. The annual cycle makes no sense to me. Do you know why everything, let's take planning and budgeting and reviewing. When I'm talking to senior executives, I'll say, how does planning work? How does your strategize? Oh, it's great. We do a planning process every year. It takes us about 5 or 6 months, but we do it on an annual basis. How do you do your budgets? Oh, we do that on an annual basis as well. We have annual budgets and everybody sticks to their budget. What about the review process? Yeah, we have annual reviews. What in the world is so magical about an annual process? And you know the answer to that. It's how long it takes the Earth to go around the sun. I mean, really? That's the way to design an operating system? How long it takes the Earth to go around the sun? One of the things that we find is that the best agile organizations break planning, budgeting, reviewing, all of these things, just like any other agile development process, into smaller modules with shorter, tighter feedback loops so that we can make it better on a continuously improving process. And when we do that, the organization becomes agile. We have agile teams working the way they should be. We have an agile architecture around them, and we have an operating model that is rebalanced to have inspiring shared ambitions, adaptive roadmaps, a culture of learning and unleashing, dynamic feedback loops everywhere in the organization, autonomy so that people know what their rights and responsibilities are, collaborative experts working together like a team of experts, and balanced and harmonized activities, modular architectures in our technology to make all of this work so that our technologies are enabling our business processes, are enabling our products and services to be more agile. And that's all I would wish for the people on this call, that you as well will be able to work in an organization like this. And for those of you that are doing what I'm doing, helping organizations to become more like this, because I find it to be some of the most fulfilling work that I've ever done in 43 years of consulting. Thank you. I think we have time for questions and answers. I may stop sharing this, but I'll leave it up. And I'll turn it over to you to ask some questions.
All right. Thank you for this amazing presentation, Darrell. Before we start our Q&A session, I would like to briefly mention one more time how to reach sponsors page. If you let me, our participants need to use the link below the broadcasting screen. When you click the link, you will see a registration page. What you need to do is just type your name, surname, and valid email address. As well, create a new password. And let's continue with our Q&A session after this advertisement for our sponsors. And here is the first question for you, Darrell. If you have one suggestion for leaders during the transformation, what would that be?
I'd say you have to become the change. And I see too many leaders that believe their responsibility is to have all the answers, to predict what needs to be done, command people to do it, and control them to make sure they're doing exactly what you're saying. And I understand that that's what Frederick Taylor demanded of leaders, but I don't think that's what makes an effective leader. I think an effective leader is humble, and that they view their major responsibility as tapping the untapped potential of the people in their organization. That my job is to learn and empower and adapt. One of the hardest lessons for me, I've been at Bain 43 years, and you have a lot of teams that come to you and say, "Oh, Darrell, we're in a pickle. What do you think we should do?" And I'll tell you, honestly, for more than 35 years, it was really fun to stroke my chin and say, "Oh, young cricket, you just go do what I tell you to do and you'll succeed." I've seen this over and over and over again. And they would go do it and it didn't work. And they weren't really committed to it. And when it worked, they'd say, "Not my problem. I was just doing what Darrell told me to do. And he was wrong once again." And I've had to learn to ask 3 questions. When they come to me with a problem, I'll say, "What do you recommend? What do you recommend?" And there's often an awkward silence. "Well, we didn't know we were supposed to recommend something. We thought you would tell us what to do." "No, what do you recommend that we do?" Number 2, how could we test that? That's an interesting idea. How could we test it? And then third, what do you need from me in order to be able to remove the barriers or the impediments? And so I would just say we need our leaders to believe in Agile principles and practices and become the change that they want to see in their people. Just delegating it to a transformation office or a program management office, that's not going to change things. Change ourselves. That's how to change things. And then change the team around us, and then change the entire organization.
Awesome. Thank you.
And the second question, and we know that upfront comprehensive planning can be useless, but how much effort should be spent for operation model, organization, and tribe structure design?
I'm sorry, could you just say that one more time? I missed the first part of it.
Okay, and we know that upfront comprehensive planning can be useless, but how much effort should be spent for operating model, organization, and tribe structure design?
So I do believe that structures will evolve over time. I just don't think we can predict upfront exactly what that structure should look like. In the same way that we in Agile don't believe you can predict all of the product specifications up front. And I will tell you, I'm spending a lot of my own personal time these days helping companies to unwind organizational structures that turned out to be wrong, operating models that turned out to be wrong. And yet the executives spent so much time designing it, often 9 months to a year designing it, that they convinced themselves anything that took this long must be right. And so just stick with it. Just stick with it longer. Trust me, it'll work. I was smart. I was right. You just have to do it longer than you've been doing it. And so it's, in my opinion, it's the same as designing any product in an agile fashion. You're going to spend some of the time, often it's roughly 5% of the time developing a roadmap. But then we're going to get into it. We're going to start developing it. We're going to test. We're going to learn. We're going to revise those things. And that's the same thing that I'd recommend for an operating model and for an organization structure. If you spend too much time on it, you're going to be overly committed to it and you're not going to adapt it. It's one of the things that we find when you get prototypes in front of customers. Earlier prototypes are beneficial for 2 reasons. One is customers give you better feedback because they can see that it's just a working prototype. And so they'll play with it in interesting ways and they'll say, "You know what? I think you could do it even better this way." And if the organization will play with your prototype and say, "This is good, but I think we could do it even better," then second of all, the innovator is not so wedded to their innovation that they don't listen to the feedback and try to reinterpret it and twist it and turn it to say, oh, what they're really saying is they love my original design. They just don't know it yet. And no, we get better feedback and we're more adaptable if we get these prototypes in front of people. It's the same way I would do every other part of the operating model. Test, learn, adapt, figure out how to make it better over time. Use Agile to become agile. Think of the irony of trying to use a bureaucratic waterfall process to become an agile organization. It's a little tough to explain. It's a little tough to say, yes, we do want to become agile just as soon as I get this reorganization all completed, then we'll be agile. It's counterintuitive to me.
All right, thank you. Here is the next question for you, Darrell. You mentioned about a gray box in your presentation. Can you please elaborate what does it mean? It's a group of people working not in an agile team, but working in the agile, working with agile values.
Yes. So what I mean is think of these as people like I do a lot of work in retail. Think of these as people who are working in stores or working in fulfillment centers or maybe working in the legal department. Do I want them to do things like being obsessed with the customers? Absolutely. Do I want them to avoid multitasking as much as possible? To the extent that I can, yes. Do I want them contributing ideas? Yes. Do I want people working on the store floor spending 80% of their time every day in huddles where they're co-creating how they should be serving customers and doing sprint planning? No. They may spend some time in the morning, 15 minutes getting together talking about what they need to do. But these are people who are going to be contributing ideas. These are people who are going to be working with agile teams to test those ideas and see whether it really works in an operating environment or whether it's just craziness to try to do that in a real world environment. So they feel like part of the process because they're constantly contributing ideas. They're rotating on and off teams to work with agile teams. They're implementing the agile innovations. They're modifying the operations to take account the learning. So yes, they're adopting agile principles and values and mindsets, but they're not spending all day around a common table together. You know, they're doing operations.
And thank you for your time and hope to see you again.
Thank you. Such an honor to be with you. These are great questions. I'm sorry we don't have more time for even more, but I look forward to connecting with many of you and talking about this.
Thank you again, Darrell.